Okay, so now we're in Parak Revi'i, and we have now a long description of how one handles problems in the soul, the sicknesses of the soul. And as we started off by saying, the characteristics, the psychological characteristics that a person has produces actions, and the ones that are appropriate are the ones that produce good actions. And the good psychological characteristics are the ones which are the mean, somewhat the mean. He's going to modify that a little bit later, between two extremes. And the axis is too much or too little of something, and then just the right amount of that something. So there's a single something, and then the characteristics of the soul are either too much of that something, too little of that something, or the example that he gave was precious. This is the indulgence in pleasure, and too much is where your desires are out of control and lead you to chase after pleasures which injure you. And the opposite, he said, is where you don't feel pleasure at all. You're not sensitive to pleasure at all, and therefore not motivated to have any pleasure. But it's not just not having desire, which you might have thought was the opposite. The opposite is being insensitive to pleasure. And the middle is what he calls precious, where you engage in the pleasures that are going to be productive for you, and cut yourself off from those that go beyond that. So the issue is your relationship to pleasure, and it could be too much, too little, and then a balanced middle. That's the appropriate one to have. And then he gives more examples. That was the one of precious. I'll give you just a few more, but I don't think we have to go through all of them, but he has a long list of them here. Nedivus, which is generosity, is in between the person who can't spend, who holds on to everything, and the person who gives everything away. Amitus Alev, which I think would be something like what we call courage, is in between foolhardiness, where you don't take account of danger whatsoever, and on the other hand, too much fear, to be fearful to take any chances at all. Lahavdil, Plato wrote about this. He wants to say that everything is wisdom. What's the difference between the person who runs into danger without thinking and the person who really has courage is knowing what the consequences will be and taking them seriously. That was the idea. But I hear also, schok, that means good-heartedness, I would say, is between levity, where you just laugh everything off and take nothing seriously, and a person who's closed up in himself and never reacts in a pleasurable way. Anava, now again, this is a Hebrew translation of Arabic words, but anava we usually translate as humility, is in between gaiva, which is pride, and shiflus haruach, which means I'm worthless. So now, this is what I told you from the Mishnah Torah, where he said that pride should be obliterated entirely. To make it consistent with this would require some thought, because here pride is one extreme, but the other extreme is also wrong. The extreme opposite of pride is wrong, and another is in the middle. Then here the translation is atzilus, is in between haughtiness and self-abasement. People who hold themselves high and present themselves. Pride is an inner feeling, an inner quality or attitude, and haughtiness is how you present yourself in public. And although they're related, they're not necessarily identical. And he's saying to be overbearing and to take advantage of other people and to present yourself as superior is wrong, but also to present yourself in a self-denigrating, self-abasing way is also not appropriate. So there's something called atzilus. Now, atzilus in Hebrew is a very delicate word, but it means presenting yourself in a realistic and honest way to the world. And here, maybe I'll just offer a comment to show you a little bit of the complexity of humility. There are people who confuse humility with shiflus haruach. Shiflus haruach merely means I'm nothing. And I forget where this is, but there's a Gemara that talks about it. And one of the Meforshim explains like this: Shiflus haruach, where I'm nothing, is a midah which can be used and can be positive, but can be overridden. Humility can never be overridden. Humility is a virtue. So I'm now speaking. Let's imagine Moses comes down from the mountain. He sees them with the golden calf, breaks the tablets, says, "Who has remained faithful, come to me." And the tribe of Levi come to me. He says, "Listen, anybody who worshipped the golden calf," which is a few thousand out of 1,200,000 adults, anyway, kill them. And they go out and they kill them and so on and so on. Now I want to know, how do you picture Moses' character when he does this? He says he's the humblest of all men. Does he say, I don't know, how can I take this on myself? This is a big decision. Maybe I should wait for God to instruct me what to do. Kill people? I could never kill people. That's just beyond my capabilities. I can't take responsibility. No, he has no trouble with it. In fact, he breaks God's tablets, he does. Hello, they don't belong to you and they don't belong to, he breaks the tablets, and it's one of the things which the Talmud says he did on his own, and God congratulated him for it later. And he takes responsibility for killing those who worshipped it. This is not a person who thinks he's nothing. So this is where shiflus haruach doesn't apply. You are the leader. You have the authority and the power to get done what needs to be done. Use it. Don't shrink from it. But on the other hand, we are told that Moses is the humblest of all men. He never abandoned his humility. Never. So that means humility can't be, I'm nothing. So it has to be analyzed very carefully. Now the Ramchal, in the Mesilas Yesharim, Psato in the Path of the Just, so-called, says that humility means I'm not worthy of praise for my virtues, for my great characteristics. And pride means I am worthy of praise for my great characteristics. Meaning, if you don't think you have any great characteristics, you're not in the ball game. You're neither a proud person nor a humble person. You're not in the ball game. And I think you're also utterly unrealistic because, as I have said here before, on occasion, there used to be a motto, a poster of a kid, let's say a 6-year-old, with a scowl on his face saying, "I know I'm somebody because God don't make junk." That's right. God don't make junk. So you aren't junk. The only question is, how much of what you are is your achievement and how much of what you are is God's gift to you? That determines whether you are worthy of praise for your good qualities or not. And Moses, I'm quoting a Tzaddik now, Moses said, I have exquisitely superior qualities to almost everyone, but I also have a different soul from them, and I had different parents from them, and I had different upbringing from them. He becomes, in effect, the king of the Jewish people. Well, he's brought up in the palace of the king, wasn't he? Not everybody gets that kind of childhood. So why shouldn't you expect from him great things? So he says, I don't know whether the average person down the street doesn't deserve more credit for his achievement starting where he started from than I do starting from where I start from. That's how you can be an unav and not think of yourself as nobody. The Torah would not want you to lie to yourself. Would not want you to practice self-deception. So anyway, that's why anava is, and I don't know anywhere the Rambam defines anava this way or differently, but anyway, and now he has a whole set of examples that are in betweens. And he says even whether these have words in your common language as qualities that you describe, or you just see that there's a certain feature of life, and there can be an appropriate amount of it, and some people take too much and too little. It's the same dynamic. Whether we have the names in the common language, we don't have the names in the common language. Now he says, many people make mistakes in identifying which characteristics are the praiseworthy ones. And it is very common for people to praise one of the extremes and not realize what they're doing. Either they confuse behavior that's at one of the extremes as the expression of what we would call the middle, or they are not confused about that, but they just think that the extreme is wonderful. And it could be either the side that's too much or the side that's too little. For example, the idea of courage. There are those who see people who are willing to take fantastic risks with no particular reason, and they are what they call fearless. Fearless is not courage. Fearless is foolishness. Fear is a functional emotion. Fear registers that you're in danger. Fear galvanizes your energy and your focus and gives you a better chance to survive. Person who's fearless, he's dangerous. Dangerous to others as well as to himself. The goal is not to be fearless. The goal is to have fear and have courage to be able to overcome the fear in the cases where it's appropriate, where it's necessary, and where there's a chance of success. So they see people who, walk into the fire, they think, wow, that's great, look at that. So either they're mistaken in thinking that that's courage, or they don't care about the word courage. They look at it and say, that's terrific. It isn't terrific. It's wrong. Take a person who suffers indignity, suffers insult, and so forth and so on, without responding. Say, wow, this person is very merciful. He doesn't want to hold people to account. He is willing to give them another chance. Isn't that beautiful? Maybe it just doesn't register. He just doesn't hear it. They use the word here, adish. Like he's indifferent. That's not the same thing as mercy. Mercy means he did me wrong. He acted wrongly. And by the way, it can make a big difference, because if he acted wrongly, he needs help. If you don't notice it, then you don't realize that he needs help. And you can't just say, well, look at that. He didn't pay any attention. Isn't that great? Maybe not. Maybe it's not so great. There's a story about Yeshivat Ohr Somayach that he moved around a lot. I don't know what city he was in at the time, but he was coming back from somewhere on a train, and there was a young Jew sitting in the same compartment, which were very small compartments on the European trains. And of course, Yeshivat Ohr Somayach didn't dress any differently from anybody else. Wasn't obviously he's one of the Gottleib Hador. And this young Jew behaved in a very insulting, inconsiderate manner. And it turned out that he got off at the same stop as Yeshivat Ohr Somayach. Yeshivat Ohr Somayach noticed that. So when he got off, because there was a whole crowd there to greet Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, he told one of the people, follow that Jew and find out why he's here. So the fellow came back and said, he's here to take an exam to be certified as a shochet, as a ritual slaughterer of meat. And so I said, well, find out what happens. So I found out, and it turns out that he failed the exam. So then Shmuel sent a messenger to that fellow and said, listen, you came from so-and-so, you failed the exam, you probably don't have resources, come to me, live in my house, and I'll teach you the laws so you can pass the exam. So he comes, and he lives by Israel. I don't know how long it was, a month, 2 months. He teaches him, and he passes the exam. Before he takes his leave, he says, listen, he says to Rabbi Yisrael, I remember the train ride, and I remember how I behaved, and I feel terrible. You went out of your way to help me, to save me. So he's telling you, I feel terrible about what I did. But why did you do it? Why was that? Why did you invest in that? So Yisrael said like this: when people treat me badly, I make up my mind to forgive them on the spot. That's my policy. But how do I know that I succeeded? Maybe somewhere in my heart, I still have some irritation, some resentment. And I know that if I invest in someone, then I want him to succeed because I invested in him. I knew you needed help in succeeding, and I knew that if I would teach you, I would want things to be good for you. I would want things to be successful for you, and that way I would conquer my feeling. That's quite different from someone who's so indifferent he doesn't even notice what happened. So not noticing what happened isn't a great virtue. It's noticing it and taking care to do something about it and thinking about what needs to be done. In this case, he was protecting himself for harboring resentment, but that has to be done also. So the person, you look and you see the irritating behavior and you see him not react, you may not realize that he's simply dead to the experience, and that's not a milah. That is not a virtue. You see a person who lives with little. Now we have a description for such a person, mistapek b'mu'at. He can manage with little. And you see, this guy's living with little. So maybe that's it. There he is. Maybe he's got this virtue of being able to manage on a little, not be upset and not be anxious over what he doesn't have and not interested in competition with others. Maybe he's just lazy. Maybe he's just lazy. And he says, I would love more. I really am unsatisfied with what I have, but I just can't make the effort to get to more. So then he isn't practicing this great virtue. On the contrary, he has a vice of laziness. So you have these mistakes that people make in perceiving other people and in classifying what they do and evaluating the particular character traits that they have, whether they are really worthy or not. In particular, picking out ones that are on the ends of the spectrum and thinking of them as ones that are worthy when they are not. Now he says, these character traits, where do they come from? Let's take a person's 18 years old or 45 years old or 60 years old. He has various character traits. Where do character traits come from? And he says they come from repeated behavior of a certain category. Because just as he said before that the character traits give rise to action, so actions can ingrain character traits. The actions that are usually produced by character trait X can train a person in character trait X, can be the origin of character trait X, can strengthen character trait X. It's a two-way relationship. The character trait gives rise to the actions, and the actions, which could be undertaken for other reasons, could give rise to the character traits. And that's where they come from in the beginning, because of his family, because of his society, because of his circumstances. Certain actions of a certain type are repeated over and over again, and that's what ingrates the character traits, good ones and bad ones. That's where it comes from. And as he says, this is very important to know, No one is born with character traits. They are trained in a person, which means that the person is plastic to a very great degree.
Even laziness?
So it's, I don't know how far to take this. Our first two children, a boy and a girl, the boy slept, I would say, 92% of the time. He was out. He ate, he got changed, he was out. The girl was awake the whole time. She was awake the whole time, not the whole time, but a lot of the time, looking around and interacting and so forth and so on. Are those character traits? Character trait is something which is aimed at a goal, whether it's pleasure or whether it's avoiding danger, or it's got much more content than you expect of a 3-week-old or a 3-month-old. So they behave in different ways. That's true. They do behave in different ways. But to call those character traits, I think, is too. You're building too much content into them. Those habits that they are born with will play a role in their development of character traits. I think that's true. But I think that the character trait is too much, is too grandiose a title for the behavior of newborns. I think that's the case. And certainly whatever is there can be overwhelmed by a lot of action when they're very plastic at an early age. Okay, so good ones or bad ones. Because for the beginning of a person's life, he doesn't have the one or the other. And he says he's going to explain that more in the 8th chapter. But through the accustoming of himself from his young age, for the family and for the people of his environment, and they could be all 3 types. In other words, this instilling of character traits works for too much, too little, and the middle types also. Now, if he's in an environment where the actions are one of the extremes, then he's going to grow up sick. He's going to have a sick soul because of that training. Similar to what I said yesterday about the person who was inculcated in competition, at a later age realized that cooperation is a very big element in a successful life, and comes to realize that he has to change his orientation. He was started out in life because of environment, and inculcated with certain character traits which were in fact injurious to him. Just in the same way that if a pregnant woman takes certain drugs, the baby will be born addicted to drugs. Or if it's popular in that subculture to do things in a certain way, and the person becomes addicted to that. I quoted to you that there's a place on this earth where the motto for growing up is, you're not a man until you've killed a man and made a man. You just haven't made it yet until you killed somebody. So, you're just not really mature and adult until you've killed somebody. We hear that with horror. Now imagine someone who's brought up with that. You don't expect them to behave the way we behave. And then later, because of the instilling of that value, seeing it all around you, seeing it praised all around you, then it becomes part of your character. So that person has a sickness of the soul. You want to ask a question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So now he says we have to consider medicine for the soul. And he says medicine for the soul is similar to medicine for the body. And the people who are experts in this are the doctors of the soul, which are, of course, those who have mastered the tradition. Now, what happens with the body? So the body has various conditions of balance between various types of characteristics, warm and cold, moist and dry, and others. various different liquids in the body which play various roles, but they should be in balance, the particular amounts that are healthy for the body. Someone who loses his balance, he loses the equilibrium that he's supposed to have, and therefore he goes to one side more than the other side, what will the doctor do? He says, let's say there's too much moisture in the body, like in the lymph glands or in other places, water on the brain, water on the lung, that sort of thing. There's too much moisture in various places. So he's not going to apply a procedure which will bring it back to the middle. He's going to apply a procedure that dries things out. It's a drying procedure with no moisture in it at all, not just the right type of moisture, because he's overly moist. Right? If you spill coffee on the table, you don't take a dishcloth that's already half wet to wipe it up. So, because that's what I want. I want some moisture on the table, but not a lot. No, you take a dry one so you can wipe it up. You take the opposite and apply it to it. Then you bring it back to the middle case. As if there's too much water in the goldfish bowl, you don't take a cup that's half full of water and then fill it up with more water. You take an empty cup and take out as much as you need to take out. So he says, and this is the upshot to this analogy, the same thing is true with respect to a person who has a character trait which is at the too much or too little end of the spectrum. How do you correct that imbalance? And he answers, you don't take a person who's at the too much end of the spectrum and then try to move into the middle. Use actions that are characteristic of the middle to move into the middle. Didn't we say that the actions can train you in the appropriate characteristic? So you might think, if he's at this end of the spectrum, use actions that are characteristic of the middle to move into the middle. The Rambam says, no, you wouldn't do that. What you would do is use characteristics that are actions that are characteristic of the other extreme to oppose his positioning at this extreme in the strongest possible way to break the hold of the extreme that he's at, break that hold. Once you've broken it, then you can try to inculcate in him actions which are characteristic of the middle, which will then enable him to inculcate the characteristic that's true of the middle. So this is a general strategy. When someone is at an extreme, you treat him. The therapy is to treat him with actions at the other extreme until you break the hold of the first extreme, and then after that, you try to inculcate the middle of the spectrum, which is the appropriate character trait. I'm doing this abstractly, and I'll give you an example in a moment. And then he puts in a subtle addition. He says, usually the two extremes aren't equal. Usually, if a person is at one extreme versus the other extreme, not the same amount of effort is required to break the hold of the extreme. The extremes aren't equal. One end is more natural to the person, and he gets trapped in the extreme with much greater force, and it needs a big effort of the opposite extreme to break the hold. The other extreme can happen, but it isn't as natural. It isn't as ingrained in his character, and therefore, as if the other extreme, it takes less effort, less opposition to break the hold of that extreme. And the doctors of the soul know which extremes are more natural to a person and need greater effort to be broken, and which are less. So that's part of the therapy, to know how much effort is needed to break the hold of the particular extreme you're talking about. So you see that this is a system with sophistication and with a need for perception, a need for analysis, need for diagnosis. And I'll give you some, yeah.
So in the case of, say, gluttony, for instance, would the medicine be fasting as opposed to cutting down a little bit and a little bit here? You could say, okay, you need to fast and completely go to that end of the extreme to understand where your equilibrium should be.
I think that's right. That's right. there's gluttony, and there's people who don't eat. Now, let me make a qualification here. We're not talking about anorexia or other such conditions, because those are, how shall I say, those are not just accustomed to one way or another. They are real sicknesses that are, to a great extent, very much out of control. So I don't know whether the Rambam's therapy would work for cases like that.
Yes.
There are people who are gluttonous, and often enough they regret it afterwards. But they don't control themselves. You know what this is like? This is like, to a certain extent, an addiction. I don't know a lot about this, but I'm told for certain addictions like alcoholism, the way you break alcoholism is first to put the person in an environment where there's no alcohol at all. Because in the midst of a drinking habit, you say to him, and by the way, I once spoke about this here, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, listen, I'm a recovered alcoholic, so let me tell you something about alcoholics. An alcoholic can go to a social event, and he can drink 1 or 2 drinks and have a nice time like everybody else. And you would never know he was different from anybody else. And then he goes home and drinks a bottle of gin. So he's not so out of control that he makes a scene everywhere he goes, and he can't put the glass down. No. Just that the drive for having the alcohol is so great that when he goes home, he drinks the whole bottle. So when he's in the midst of the habit, to say, no, just limit yourself to the 2 or 3 that you had at the party, and don't drink a bottle when you go home. You can't do that. You can't do that. You put him in a sanitarium where there's no alcohol at all. So it's murder. It's murder. But after a while, it loses its effect. By the way, actually, my father, who lived to 93, he smoked cigars, Havana cigars, the real thing. And then he get cramps in his legs in his 50s. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you're smoking cigars. In 3 months, we're putting you in a box. Quit! So he quit on the spot. He said the next 3 months were horrible. Absolutely horrible. And then he got over it. He never went back to smoking. But you can stop that way, and then afterwards, in some cases, you can go back to the behavior that you were doing before and do it in moderation. So there is such an idea. I think with alcoholism is very tricky. I think I saw different reports. Most say that an alcoholic has to stay off altogether, but some say you can go back to a certain extent. It may vary, and different addictions may have different outcomes. I don't know. But that's what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam is saying that you move the person off the extreme by prescribing behaviors at the other extreme. So gluttony would mean eat the bare minimum. Eat the bare minimum. Now, because when you're in the midst of the habit, they say, well, 3 ounces or 4 ounces? I don't know. Yeah. How about 3.9? That's less than 4, and because I'm hungry. Because this is dinner. Well, what am I doing with dinner for not eating? That kind of calculation, that kind of self-control is beyond his capacity. Yeah. So you make it easy and simple. 2 ounces of this, 2 ounces of this, 2 ounces of this. The doctor says you'll survive on that. That's it, and only that. And after the grip of gluttony is broken, he's not tied to it anymore, then you can gradually bring him to a point where he has an average natural diet. Now, I don't remember the Rambam using this case, but what would you think? Which is more natural to a person? Which is more rooted in a person, so that if he's at this extreme, it'll be harder to move him, and you need longer application of the opposite extreme, and vice versa. Gluttony or starving oneself?
Gluttony is animalistic tendency. Gluttony
is definitely much more programmed in the person, especially when you have unlimited food and unlimited temptation, the way the food is presented, the way it's prepared. So if a person is a glutton, you're going to have to work very hard to move him from that extreme. Whereas if a person doesn't eat enough, again, not with anorexia or something like that, but just doesn't eat enough, then it'll be much easier, but you'll have to like he says in the fifth chapter, which we're coming to, Yes Hashem, you hire gourmet chefs, and you prepare the most tantalizing food to awaken in him a desire for food, and then when he's already, that extreme has broken its hold on him, then you can move him to the center. Yeah.
And also, if someone is miserly, overly miserly, then the antidote then is to get them to give more to charity, to get them to have.
So now, what do you think? What's more natural to the human being, to be a miser or to give everything away? Miser, for sure. There are many miserly people. A number of people who just give everything away and can't hold on to anything. Again, I'm not talking about with a psychological sickness, but just give everything away is much smaller than the people who can't spend. People can't spend. Sometimes a fear. I don't know what I'm going to need for tomorrow, and that fear is overblown, and there are all sorts of reasons. So the doctor of the soul has to know. Not only he has to use the opposite to break the hold of this extreme, but also how much effort is required to make that transition. Then the Rambam says, I'm telling you that the ideal is at the center. But the great pious ones didn't practice being at the center. They practiced being off-center somewhat. The word that he uses makes it sound like it's not a great deal. I'm not bringing back what we said about anger and pride in the Mishnah Torah. Because since the one extreme is more attractive than the other, that extreme is more dangerous than the other, then you want to be a little bit further away from the more attractive, more dangerous extreme. So on the gluttony starvation axis, the person who's a glutton is going to want to be not in the middle, but a little bit over the middle to the self-depriving side, because gluttony is a much more attractive extreme. So you have to take that into account. Of course, you'd have to define how much is enough, not too much. All of this goes into being a doctor of the soul. Yeah.
And would that, for that person, actually be their center? So they have they've got a gravitation towards being miserly. For them to be a little bit more magnanimous would be their center for them, because that keeps them in check.
Okay, you could speak that way. I understand what the words mean when you speak that way, but then you introduce confusing ideas.
Okay.
So there's a real center and there's a subjective center, and each person is with a subjective center. Now with the real center, better to say there's a center, meaning that a person who wasn't attracted, like most people are, naturally to the gluttony side rather than the starvation side, right, should be at the center.
Yeah. Yes,
if there weren't danger in being attracted and subverted, then you should be in the center. Right? Even if everybody ends up off center, you have to know, because it's important to know what the ideal is, and it's important to know why we aren't reaching the ideal, and to know whether that's praiseworthy or whether it's objectionable or whether it's possible to escape. All of this is part of understanding the dynamics of the system.
Yeah, it's actually dangerous to have a subjective center, because it's better to have the real center and for the doctor then to prescribe it. So you need to be a bit off center, and that will work for you. But you just know that that's the prescription that you're being given, as opposed to trying to. Exactly
right, and the circumstances may change as your life goes on.
Yeah, sure.
Some things that are very attractive at the age of 30 aren't so attractive at the age of 70. So there may be less danger. If there's less danger, then he can move to the center.
Yes.
Because the circumstances will change.
And so an example of that be if someone say they're in their 20s, they don't have a lot of money to give right now, but they give 10% of what they earn, but now they get to their 50s and their 60s, and thank God they've got a lot of money to spare. Now suddenly they can give 30% or 40% of their wealth. That doesn't constitute a sickness, because they're not exposing themselves to financial danger, so to speak, by depleting their wealth in that way, so they can move. They can have that dynamic movement in terms of being more generous without it.
Okay, so here's an interesting case. What you're saying is true up to where you got, that spendthriftness and its dangers depends upon the resources that you have, and the amount of money you have when you're 20, the amount of money you have at 50, hopefully is not the same, and therefore, and then even the percentage, from the point of view of endangering your economic security and so on and so on, would justify perhaps spending, giving away 40% of your income, as opposed to when you're 20, only 10% would be appropriate. That may be correct as far as we've analyzed here, but the Torah has rules for this. And one of the Torah's rules is that for charity, no more than 20%, no matter how much you have. No more than 20%. Now you may ask, well, why is that? I mean, what should stop you? And one explanation, which I saw in a tshuva of Moshe, and I'm told it's found elsewhere, is this. What's your attitude? I can give 50%. Why? I'll tell you what, because I have. I'm set. I'm okay. So I can afford to give away. Oh, really?
Tomorrow.
You're set? You're okay? Really? Who's guaranteeing it? Is it in your pocket? So I'll tell you a word from the Kotzker Rebbe. Kotzker Rebbe made this point. He says that when they had the manna, every night they finished the manna that came down that day, and they went to bed with their larders empty, and had to fall again tomorrow. So it says someone who's worried about tomorrow's manna is Miktani Amana. He's not really fully confident in what the Kodesh Baruch Hu promised. His confidence and his trust in the Kodesh Baruch Hu isn't complete. So the plain shot is, why should he worry about tomorrow? Kodesh Baruch Hu said it'll be tomorrow. The Kotzker Rebbe said, he's Miktani Amana because he's only worried about tomorrow. He's not worried about today. Oh, I got it today. What are you talking about? It's sitting there in the bowl. It could become wormy. It could disappear. There could be a lightning could strike it. What do you mean? The thing you got today is in your pocket. You really own it. You control it. That's where he has a failure of trust in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Because he thinks this part, Kodesh Baruch Hu is out of already. It's already done. It's over. That's taken care of already, right? So that means there has to always be a consciousness of your precariousness. That's another element in the ideal psychological state. Now, if you don't know this is Takanas Usha in the Gemara, this is not more than 20%. So then the characteristics of the soul that have to be taken into account are subtle, and there are a lot of them. And the doctors of the soul have to know, the whole gamut. Yeah.
And so in that example, one could then look at their wealth as being borrowed, as being lent to us from Hashem, and so part of that is understanding that if we don't adhere to the rules, then that could become precarious, and like the manna that becomes wormy, you need to adhere to you need to save, keep, and distribute the wealth in accordance with Torah precepts, not one's own judgment. And so
exactly right.
And so the minute you start trying to,
that's exactly right, yeah. And you put it well, because I could ask, shall I use my own judgment or not use my own judgment on what's mine?
it's not yours.
But in the end, it's not yours. You are like the treasurer of a corporation. Corporation pays out money by your signing checks. That's how it happens. But if you become confused and say, I'm signing the checks, it was my money, you're going to be in trouble, because it really belongs to the corporation. So here, like one of the tzaddikim said, I never give a penny of my money to charity. Never, not a penny, because none of it's my money. I'm simply the executor of this fund, and the owner of the fund, capital O, told me this and this percentage goes for this purpose, and that percentage goes for that purpose, and that goes for charity, so on and so on. And I'm distributing the money according to the way the owner of the fund wants it distributed. I'll tell you one more story, then I've got to quit. There was a poor man who came to Meir Pramishlan, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, and he said, there's someone who owes me money. I'll give you a letter. Go to him and show him the letter, and he'll give you what you need. So he takes the letter, and it's quite a distance. It takes him weeks to get there. He gets there, and he sees the fellow, and he presents the letter. So the fellow reads the letter. He says, there must be some mistake. Reb Meir doesn't have a fund with me. He never gave me any money. There must be some confusion here. I'll give you something, but I can't give you all of what Rabbi prescribed. So when you see him, you'll tell him that there's some mistake. I'm not the right person. Good. So he didn't get the money. He went back, and then this wealthy person started to lose his money. Over a period of time, he lost everything. He became a beggar. This took years, and he was wandering, and his wanderings took him to Pramishlan, and then that incident. He recalled that as that letter from the mayor of Prakim. Let me go and ask him. I know what he meant. So he went to the mayor and told the story. He said, "Why do you think you became wealthy? Because Baruch Hu invested wealth in you so that it should be used for certain purposes. And I know what those purposes are. One of those purposes was to give to this fellow. And you didn't give it to him, so you didn't deserve to have it. That's why you had it. You had it for that purpose. So it didn't mean that I lent you money or I gave you money for a fund. Telling you what the purpose of it is. So it's exactly right. You're given it and you're given it to use it in certain ways. And if you don't use it in those ways, then that merit doesn't stand you well. And if it doesn't stand you well, then other things can happen.
And it goes in both directions. If you are, say, giving that 70%, then you're also not going to have more wealth come to you because you're showing that you can't be judicious with the wealth that you're meant to be giving in a certain way.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that then you won't have it,
yes.
but you're subject to that possibility.
Yes.
That's right.
Thank you.
Pleasure.